I'm not a big fan of birthdays. I'm not the sort to throw a large party or invite all my friends out. My close friends know this, so I usually do something low-key with my family or close friends. After dinner with my family one year, 3 of my pals texted me, attempting to make plans to go out and do something. We weren't going to bars because we were only 19 then and didn't have false ids. My friend Jay has a Jeep, so he suggested we go night off-roading on one of the tracks near our houses. It was this massive state park with trails wide enough for off-roading. He'd done it before. Theoretically, it's illegal, but nobody's in those woods after dark. Since my birthdays are in July, the days are long. It only gets completely dark, approximately 9 o'clock, when we start going to the park. To celebrate my birthday, my friend Carl brought a bunch of weeds, and my other friend Joey got a handle on vodka. The goal was to hotbox the automobile in the middle of the woods and go crazy. Jay would not consume alcohol because he was driving. So, we started an hour earlier. The entry to the state park's parking lot would be coned off, but since there are no night security personnel, it's simple to get out of the car, move one of the cones, and then drive around it. We were only looking for officers before approaching the parking lot. After we passed through the gate, there was a fairly lengthy stretch of a small one-way road with woods on either side. It eventually led to a large open parking lot surrounded by woods on 3 sides, baseball fields, and a playground on the other. Jay knew just where to go to get to the trails, which were ostensibly for walking but were broad enough for driving, in his opinion. Before accessing the course, we checked to make sure there were no cops in the parking lot. However, once we were on the trail, Jay turned on his brights for increased visibility. The course was rocky and tight in places, and Jay had to drive gently to avoid scraping any trees or plants on either side. After all, the trails were not designed for automobiles. Thus, extreme caution was required. It was undoubtedly enjoyable initially. When the route opened up, there were drops, and the bumpiness of the ride made it enjoyable, almost like an amusement park ride. Carl rolled a joint and began passing it around once we were deep enough into the trails. Jay turned off the headlights and turned off the engine. We sat in the car listening to music and passing the bottle around. The music was also quite loud. So when we thought we heard something outside, we became silent and glanced at each other. Jay switched off the music, and we all simultaneously said, "What was that? Or did you hear what I heard?" We were all in agreement that it sounded like high-pitched screaming. Jay turned on the headlights again, but no one was before us. Still, we needed to get out of there, so he drove further down the trail. We finally concluded that what we had heard was a female fox. From then on, we hung around with the music turned down a notch. We were hanging around and mixing cocktails. As a joke, my pals once sang happy birthday to me very loudly. Eventually, I needed to pee, so I exited the car and strolled a few steps off the trail into the trees. I heard what I thought were footsteps nearby in the middle of the stream. I stopped short and returned to my car, telling my friends I heard footsteps. Jay turned on his headlights once more, and we were the first to scream when we noticed someone standing approximately 10 feet in front of the car on the side of the trail. It was a woman wearing a hood. We expected her to act, but all she did was stand there. "You all, right?" Jay said as he rolled down his window. A woman then backed gently into the trees, disappearing from view. Carl, in the back, still zonked out of his head, noticed something horrible. I'll never forget when he said, "Guys, we're encircled." We all looked around in the trees. At least 3 more persons had to be clothed in sweaters with hoods on opposite sides of the automobile, all staring at it. Mind you, it wasn't a frigid night. It was the middle of July. They were all standing in the trees, just off the route. Carl yelled in the back seat, prompting us to turn around and find a man standing outside the rear windshield, peering in. The guy's deadpan look created the scary red glow from the taillights. "Get us out of here. Just leave," I said. And Jay listened. He placed the car in drive and drove as fast as possible over the trail's rocks and bumps. We were all terrified, and the walk out of that trail took far too long. But I know we were all pleased when we finally reached the pavement by another exit of the dirt trails. Jay, the most sober of us all, told the rest of us, intoxicated or high, that we were going home. We considered whether those folks were simply a group of young adults hanging out deep in the woods like us, but that wouldn't explain why they were all just creepily staring at us, standing still, or why one of them was standing directly outside the back windshield peering inside the car, because they were all wearing hoodies on a July night. We recognized that the scream-like noise we heard wasn't a fox and had something to do with them. In any case, we never considered off-roading in those forests at night again. I'll never forget my younger sister's 5th birthday for the right reasons. It was in a tea-room establishment hosting a princess party for children's birthdays. I didn't want to participate in any of the activities or make contact with the princesses because I was afraid people would think I was a baby, like a normal, tough 6th grader. Instead, I was sitting in the hallway, playing on my Ds, when a random woman came to me and asked, "Hey, you're Gloria's son, right?" Gloria is my mother's name, so I replied, "Yeah." This lady introduced herself as my Aunt Sarah and stated that I was probably too young to recall the last time we saw each other. She began talking about how large I had grown and how I was doing in school. I was used to these encounters with family, so I didn't question it and just offered the standard responses. Sarah then explained that she had brought a large dollhouse as a birthday gift and needed assistance moving it out of her car. She informed me that she had also brought another cake and offered me the first slice in exchange for my service. I was about 12 then, so I was educated about creeps and how this was a nearly classic kidnapping scenario. But as I already stated, these encounters were highly typical in my family. I also admit that I made the error of placing more trust in Sarah because she was a woman. So I promised to assist Sarah and followed her out the back door. The automobile wasn't parked. It was still running, with the man behind the wheel. Sarah could tell the man's presence made me suspect, so she immediately informed me that he was my Uncle Dennis and began pressuring me to finish the dollhouse before the cake frosting melted. I had a horrible feeling. Why hadn't she asked Dennis to assist her in carrying the dollhouse in? And why did they leave the car running when there were plenty of open parking spaces? I stood still and refused to move. Sarah's tone changed from friendly to commanding me to get to the car. I smacked her hand away and yelled at her to quit tugging on my jacket sleeve. She was upset, and for a few seconds, I believed Dennis was about to exit the car. Fortunately, we all heard my mother and aunt calling my name. Sarah got in the car with Dennis and drove away. I dashed through the rear door, meeting my mother and aunt halfway inside. I quickly informed them of what had occurred. My mother hugged me and apologized, assuring me everything would be fine, while my aunt told the tea room employees. They locked down the tea room and gathered all the youngsters in one room to ensure no one else had gone missing. Fortunately, no one had. The cops eventually arrived to question me about what had occurred. I told them what I knew about Sarah and Dennis. The police officers I spoke with promised to contact me and my mother if they learned anything new, but we never heard anything from the police regarding Sarah or Dennis or their real names. As far as we know, they have never been apprehended. I'm still puzzled as to how Sarah knew my mother's name. I try to be grateful that I'm alive and avoid thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't followed Sarah to the trunk of her car. My uncle is extraordinarily wealthy and owns a beautiful waterfront home with a large backyard and pool. So, since he was out of town for the month, he allowed me to use the backyard to have a big party for my 21st birthday, because it was my 21st birthday, and I wanted to go all out. I asked my friends and told them to invite all their friends, as long as they brought their beer. The celebration began at 8 o'clock, and my uncle had a surround sound speaker system in his backyard that was ideal for parties. I connected to my burner phone and played a music mix suitable for parties. I instructed everyone I invited to stay outside unless they needed to use the restroom. It was purely a garden party. I quickly discovered there were more individuals than I expected. Almost all of my invited pals turned up with extra people, And on top of that, people I didn't even recognize were walking in groups through the gates. I had to presume that everyone here was brought by people I invited. Still, when there were more than 80 people in the backyard, I began worrying about the cleanup and any damage I discovered the next day. I did my best to watch who was coming and going from the residence. It was a long night, and as the birthday boy, I was easily distracted. The celebration became much more crowded before it began to calm down, and the police eventually arrived and shut it down after many neighbors complained. So, except for a small group of my pals, I had to tell everyone to leave. Perhaps 10 of us were left outside around the pool, and eventually, it was just me and my friend Rob. My uncle said I couldn't have anyone sleep over, but I didn't think it would hurt if just Rob stayed over. He was blackout drunk anyhow and would easily crash out on the couch. I led him inside, then returned outside to secure both gates and the rear door. When I walked in, Rob was already spread out on the couch in the living room, and whenever I tried to talk to him, asking if he was already asleep, he'd make a half-effort grunt sound. So I left him there. I examined the restroom to make sure it wasn't too filthy, and it wasn't too awful, save for a couple of empty beer cans on the counter. The cleanup would be pretty easy. The next day, with Rob's assistance, I went upstairs, intending to sleep in one of the numerous bedrooms, wondering why my uncle was so severe about no one sleeping over, even though there were 4 more beds. The 2 ornate stairways and the massive foyer went up to an upper balcony with a view of the entryway, then a slew of bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and another living area. I went to bed after brushing my teeth with my finger in the upstairs bathroom. I was also inebriated, so I fell asleep quickly. I awoke an hour later feeling quite nauseous. I used much too many liquors in my concoction. I had to dash to the bathroom to puke. After puking, I walked back out into the upstairs balcony area and heard footsteps from the entrance. I stepped up to the foyer balcony railing and glanced down. "Rob?" I asked, and a figure in the darkness below stopped moving. I thought I saw somebody peering up at me, but I couldn't see the person's face or any features because the house was so dark. A sound of snoring could then be heard from the living area downstairs. It had just occurred to me that the person in the entryway was not Rob. "Who is that?" I asked, figuring it was just another partygoer who had passed out somewhere intoxicated earlier, but they didn't respond. More footsteps came from the kitchen area downstairs. My heart began to pound at this point. "I'm going back to sleep," I said, assuming they were just party attendees when, in fact, I was going back to the bedroom to lock the door and phone 911 immediately. But then I recalled Rob was around. I had no choice but to try to warn him. I dialed his number and someone answered. I said Rob at least 3 times before uttering anything else. All I could hear on the other end was breathing. I hung up the phone and contacted 911, and while I was on the phone and whispering to the 911 operator, the doorknob twisted around, followed by a soft knock on the door. I asked the operator in hushed tones if I should mention I was on the phone with the cops, and he responded, "No, don't make my presence known." "What about my friend Rob?" I said, and he paused briefly as if he didn't know what to say. Then he added, "Simply remain in the room until the police arrive. They are unlikely to hurt my pal if they believe he is sleeping." I could tell that the operator wasn't sure what to do about it, but I figured it was also the best option. At this point, I could only stay in the locked room and wait for the cops to arrive. The operator informed me that the police were on their way and that they would try the front and back doors. The cops could enter through the rear door, which the burglars left unlocked. Then, I was told to go downstairs and meet them. I roused Rob and told the cops everything while intoxicated and disoriented. I searched the house for missing items, but it wasn't my place, so I didn't know what was there beforehand. My uncle's bedroom was locked, and he didn't have many items lying around. Before departing, the cops searched the entire residence. They promised to keep an officer on the street for the night, which made me feel better. I only told my uncle once he asked about his Cartier watch one day. One of the attackers snatched it right out of the kitchen drawer. I had no choice but to tell him the truth, and he was not pleased. He never asked me to compensate him for the watch, but he never let me host any gathering at his house again, which I don't blame him for.